I have to agree with that. I don't know how he did it. But we made it work, and you really have to hand it to Frankenheimer for pushing and pushing and pushing people to the limits to get it done.
He had a reputation for always doing it the most difficult way possible because of his search for reality.
I felt he definitely broke ground, that he made the commitment to film real racing under real conditions.
He followed the real race, so you didn't get a chance to do it 3 times.
And at first I thought, oh my God, the sound, the noise, and I don't like anything going fast.
To be going so fast and working so close to these race cars. Every second you're on the edge of something happening.
Bear in mind, all we'd ever seen were black and white 2D foggy photographs in newspapers, and suddenly we had 3D cinerama of a lap of Spa. It was absolutely mind-blowing.
We got as close as you could get at that time to what racing was really all about.
When the film starts, what Frankenheimer could easily have done is shown you Brian Bedford putting his earplugs in, or they could have shown you James Garner putting his gloves on. But in fact, you see Jochen Rindt, you see Phil Hill, you see the real drivers. And that instantly makes you understand that this is a film that is going to be as close as possible to reality. What makes Grand Prix so brilliant is that when we see the 66 Belgian Grand Prix, it is the 66 Belgian Grand Prix. It's not some stupid race that they've created. It's a documentary apart from anything else. We were used to seeing Hollywood's efforts at making films about motor racing, and we were used to sneering at them. This was a film where real efforts had been made to make everything accurate.
His main quest was for realism, and that's why I think Grand Prix isn't dated at all, because you have this feeling of it actually happening.
Everybody was very, very skeptical of another movie being made about racing. As a matter of fact, to the point where Ferrari didn't want anything to do with it. He just said, you go make your movie. It has nothing to do with what we do, and you can't use the word Ferrari in this picture. And that was pretty much the attitude of all the drivers.
Most of the drivers at first didn't like the idea at all. John Surtees driving for Ferrari and Bandini with Ferrari, they weren't too happy with it. Jackie Stewart was not happy at all with it.
There was all kinds of various feelings for and against this going on. Was it corrupting our sport, or wasn't it?
Well, my first reaction was that let's hope they do a better job of it than they've done in the past, because at that time we'd never seen a racing film that meant anything to the drivers.
When you first run against a big Hollywood person, you're kind of interested. What's he like? Is he going to make us famous, or is he going to take what he can and run? You have no idea.
There was an enormous amount of talk going on. A lot of the mechanics said they couldn't get on with their job because there were cameramen and wires everywhere. So there was a general kind of faint feeling of disapproval that Hollywood was interfering with what was then thought to be a very European sport. Frankenheimer had an amazingly good brain for racing. When it came to detail of badging on cars or colours or the way drivers were putting their overalls on, all the detail, Frankenheimer was in charge of it 100%. And I think that shows how much actually he loved motor racing.
I think it began when he was a little boy, practically. There are pictures of him driving the family car down the driveway. And then when he was at Williams, he would come home every weekend, and as he said, it was the Taconic Parkway Grand Prix every weekend for him.
I always loved cars. And then when I got a little money together, I started racing, club racing. And I realized that even in my wildest dreams, if I had started doing this when I was 12, I didn't have the talent to be really a guy like Phil Hill or Jimmy Clark or Jackie Stewart or Jack Brabham, the guys that were the big Formula One drivers at the time.
It was interesting looking back at the making of this movie that there was this tremendous competition going on between Warner Brothers with McQueen, basically, and MGM with Frankenheimer. And Frankenheimer wanted McQueen for the role of Pete Aaron.
It's never really been totally clear to me what happened. He had this disastrous meeting with my partner. It's a meeting that I should have been at, and for professional reasons, I was doing something else. So I said to my partner, you take the meeting with Steve.
And so he sent Eddie Lewis, and apparently Steve McQueen and Eddie Lewis hated each other on sight. And Steve McQueen suddenly decided, to hell with John. He was going to do a Grand Prix movie.
I don't think Frankenheimer wanted me. He didn't want anybody that had an opinion. Anyway, the studio wanted me. So I think I was inherent in the deal. And Frankenheimer went along with it, and then we got along pretty good, Frankenheimer and I, except for a couple of points.
The cars that were used for the shots that were taking place purely for the cameras on the Mondays and the Tuesdays after the Grand Prix, they were Formula 3 cars which had been dressed up to look like Formula 1 cars, and all the exhaust pipes were correct. All the suspension parts had been made to look correct, so that when they intercut, they really were pretty similar.
And we were doubly blessed because the season was 1966, which was the first year that they went to the 3-liter formula from the 1.5-liter formula the year before, so the manufacturers were changing the look of the cars every week.
The fact that Frankenheimer refused to use doubles and made the actors do the driving simply underlines how determined he was to make the thing work.
I was watching you on the first day here, and you didn't look too happy then. You're looking a bit happier now, I notice.
Well, it wasn't a matter of happy. I think it was, or unhappy. I think it was a matter of concern. Naturally, we want to know that the guy next to us is capable, and I want him to know that I'm capable. In other words, it's a very dangerous thing, I think, for actors to do. And it's a very dangerous thing for drivers to do, to sit in a car next to an amateur.
All the drivers except Garner went through Jim Russell's racing school. And I got these varying reports from Jim each day. And I'd get calls like the following. He'd say, well, the Frenchman, meaning Yves Montand, he said, the Frenchman, he said, is going to be all right. He's not a very good driver, but he'll be okay. I said, yeah. He said, the Italian hasn't got the faintest idea what he's doing, but he may be all right. He said, now the Englishman is hopeless. He said he can't even shift gears. So Brian Bedford, in reality, never drove in the picture. He was always double. Garner, we put with Bob Bondurant.
The studio got in touch with me and said, we'd like you to do a little training in these cars. I said, fine. And they assigned Bob Bondurant. They gave him to me for 2 months before the film, and we went out to Willow Springs. And I drove 2 or 3 different kinds of cars. I went in with the fact that I don't know anything about racing. I don't know anything about driving. And what Bondurant taught me was a lot.
I thought Garner did an excellent job of driving. He got smooth, he got going fairly quick. If he was in a real race, he would have been able to beat several drivers. In a Formula 1 race, that's saying a lot.
You know, we'd go a little faster, a little faster, a little faster. And then he would go to the corners and he would look and see you're not going in deep enough there or you're going in too soon. We'd build up the speed and build up the speed on each lap until I found out that's about my limit. And it was pretty close to his, too.
I honestly believe that if Garner had decided he was going to do this as a young man, he could have made a very good career as a race driver. He was that good.
One of the things that Frankenheimer was very, very good at was the dynamics of the car and how to photograph the car. In terms of the camera angles and the clarity of the shots, it stands up to today's technology, no doubt about that. The camera car was a Ford GT40, which was a Le Mans-type racing car of the day, capable itself of 200 miles an hour, being driven by Phil Hill, who did a lot of work in the film. He appears briefly and has a couple of lines. And of course, he was a brilliant driver. He was world champion a few years before for Ferrari.
The idea was put the audience in the car. We fooled around for months, experimenting with various places to put the camera and with various lenses.
When we first started testing lenses and cameras and trying to figure out just the best look that we were going to have on Grand Prix, we would be trying out different vibration-proof mounts and ways of dampening the vibration that you would get in a camera mounted to a race car. And we found out that by not using any vibration-proof mounts and just locking it to the car and going with a certain amount of shake and jiggle and everything that the camera would give you, and make the picture look twice as exciting and it looked real.
One of the clever things Frankenheimer also did was a use of very long lenses, which gives you a great feeling of speed, particularly when you're panning, and some of the shots are even a little bit soft because the lenses are so long, it's just hard for the guys to hold focus. And then great shots of cars on long lenses coming straight towards camera, and that's where it was innovative.
In the mid-60s, Formula One was very much more laid back. There weren't the huge commercial interests. But even so, when John Frankenheimer's crew and actors and hangers-on and makeup artists and all the other people you need all arrived, some of the Formula One establishment got a little bit sniffy about it.
In those days, the teams, aside from Ferrari, really didn't have that much strength. So we were smart enough to go to Carroll Shelby, and Carroll Shelby kind of embraced us. And through Carroll Shelby, I got to Dan Gurney and also to Phil Hill. And then, the year before we made the picture, I went around to all the races and I signed these guys up for 2 years exclusivity to movies, to me. They still did not really believe us as being anybody to be taken seriously. As a matter of fact, we were a terrific inconvenience to them because we had track time just before their practice. We also had a big unit in situations where we got in the way.
Let me speak about you as a director now. You're generally admired by the people who work for you as a director. Yet your methods are fairly forthright, and you can be quite rude. Do you find that by keeping things at fever pitch, you get the best out of people?
Well, in the first place, I don't mean to be rude. You know, I really don't.
He seemed like a creative guy, and he talked a lot, which fit the image that you might have had in your mind about a Hollywood person. He wasn't shy about spending money, as near as we could see.
And he had a penchant for using the F word at a time that it wasn't acceptable yet. And he knew that, and so he used it for all it was worth until it got to be old hat, and then he dropped it.
Oh yeah, Frankenheimer, he could be a pain in the butt sometimes, but he wanted something done right, and he would keep going until he got it done right.
I'm not implying any criticism here. Your methods of working are obviously your own, and they're obviously vitally successful and have always been successful. It's just that I wondered if this was a deliberate policy, and that the way to get things moving was to shout and scream a bit, and that if you came on quietly, nothing got done.
Well, Alan, look, I became a director at 24 years old, which is probably pretty good. But the whole thing is that everybody thought I was an inexperienced kid, you know, who didn't know what the hell he was doing. So the only way I could get it done was just to say, do it! And I've never stopped that.
John Frankenheimer, to me, was a man of iron. He had incredible nerves that it just wouldn't let things faze him too much.
He wasn't a pushover. He was very strong, and at times you hear, maybe too strong with people, but I didn't have that impression or that experience with him.
He was an overpowering, overwhelming kind of person. So just to see him standing in a room was like, oh my gosh.
He was a fantastic director. And he was a really professional guy. There's no way he will never get a no for an answer.
I just find that in order to do it, I almost have to do it myself. I mean, nobody's going to do it for me. I had great dreams of a second unit, but it didn't work. So it's going to be a first unit operation, that's it. And so I have to be about 4 places at the same time. Now, the only way I know how to do that is get myself up to a point where I'm capable of doing it. And if it puts people under stress, maybe that's good. I believe in being honest. I certainly would never like to be considered rude. If I am rude, I apologize to anyone that I've been rude to.
People didn't realize about him was that he was very laid back, actually, and had to sort of push to get that adrenaline going. But once it went, it was like a force of nature.
Frankenheimer was tough on people. He was really hard on people. He's a bit of a genius at work. And he was a very talented director, but he ran roughshod over people.
You know, in the end run, my name is going to be on this film. And, an assistant isn't. You know what I'm talking about?
Frankenheimer did the right thing. He just took it by the scruff of the neck and went to Monte Carlo, and that was the first shoot.
It was just chaotic. Not only that, but at that time, half of Monaco was owned by the Grimaldi family and half by Onassis. And so in the days when the Grimaldi said we could close down the streets, Onassis said we couldn't close down his part of the streets. So you could drive about 2 miles on the circuit and you had to stop and wait till the next day to go. It was really wild.
Yesterday we had a rebellion. The shopkeepers of Monte Carlo arrived and started waving at the camera because they claimed we were closing down all their shops and everything else. Now, I'm not saying that they don't have a valid point, but the whole thing is that I can't superimpose a title on the screen saying that the reason that these idiots are waving here is because, they didn't like the idea of the picture being made, because they're going to be the first bastards, pardon me, to get into the motion picture house to see the bloody picture, when it opens here.
The company had paid all these shopkeepers and whatever for the time we blocked them off and they couldn't do business. Well, I'm out in a boat in the bay there, and I finally called on the radio and said, "What is holding things up there? I'm freezing." "Oh, some guy wants more money." I got on that boat and I said, "Let's go up there."
I am freezing my ass off. Now get your butt out of here. I'm going to throw you right in the water.
Frankenheimer, who usually is right in the middle of all that, wasn't trying to hold me back.
What is your problem? I am freezing to death out here for a half hour while you talk. How much money do you want?
No, I speak English, Mr. God.
Well, then you get the hell out of that shot or I'm going to put you out.
Yes, sir.
That's the only guy I had trouble with in France.
I was in the air in a helicopter, and we were having our own situations with our pilot. His name was Chaumont. He was flying this Alouette 3, and we were chasing the cars down low. We were right just above the water, skimming over the boats, and we had to literally go straight up, and we'd do a hairpin turn and come back down over the track and over all the people. And I guess the officials felt we were getting too close, and some of the people were complaining. Frankenheimer yelled over the radio. They said, "God damn it, Stevens, move your cameras further away." I'm getting a lot of feedback down here. And about 10 seconds later, he says, "But don't move too far back." He was saying this for the officials. So we did. We moved back, and things sort of settled down for a while, and then Chaumont went right back to it again. He was doing it. I guess the crowd got used to us.
John Stevens was in that helicopter. He'd have his feet hanging out on the landing strut. And he'd come in, and he'd have green all over him from clipping trees with his feet.
After Monte Carlo was over, I cut together a quick 30 minutes of stuff I shot at Monte Carlo, called Ferrari, and asked him if he would look at it. And he said, "Well," he said, "I don't have any projection equipment. I don't have anything like that." I said, "Just tell me you'll look at it." So he said, "Yes, I will." So I shut the movie down, chartered a plane, brought the movie, a projectionist, projectors, and everything else to Maranello, to his office, set it up, and ran him the 30 minutes. When it was over, the lights came up, he embraced me. He said, "You can have the team, you can have the factory, you can have everything."
And that's why Dragoni is in the team, the Ferrari team manager. That's why we have really good close-up shots of the Ferrari. That's why there's access to the Ferrari factory, which had never been done before. Whether you're writing a book, a race report, a movie, if you've got Ferrari there, you've basically got Formula One racing. Because without Ferrari, it's not Formula One. And once he got Ferrari, Frankenheimer knew he had a movie that he could make and that would be reasonably successful, even on a bad day.
Every morning, John would get out, and he would say, "Gentlemen, I remind you again, this is a movie. This is a film. It's not a race. And if at any moment you feel uncomfortable or feel that you're going to be taking a big chance, don't. We can always come back and do it again."
It's not an easy thing to film the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa.
The race started, I'm in the helicopter, and we went along about 8 or 10 miles. Everything just started dicing back and forth. I'm looking through my camera, and all of a sudden I see what looks like a rooster tail coming off behind the cars. And they said, "Boy, that didn't look right."
By the time I got to the rain, the front of the car could have been in the rain at big time, and the back was still dry. It was that kind of a curtain. I slowed down so much for that curtain of rain, which you couldn't see maybe 30 feet, 40 feet at the most. And Phil Hill, driving the Frankenheimer camera car, went by me. That's how slow I was going.
Gurney suddenly slowed right up. He wasn't about to wreck his car, so he played it cool and slowed down immediately. And I went by him, even though I wasn't supposed to. We're not going to ruin our shot just because somebody decides they're going to bail out.
I'm looking down, I see these cars spinning out and doing different things, so I keep photographing all this going on, and the cars are going 150, 60, 70 miles an hour, and they're hitting this water, puddles of water. So we kept shooting all the way around the track, and this is where we got some of the most interesting film.
Pretty soon, I must have passed at least half a dozen cars that were off, upside down, this way and that way, and then another group of cars, maybe another 4, already in trouble right there.
One by one, I saw cars disappearing in front of me. Bonnier almost went into the upstairs window of the house, and Jackie Stewart further around. He broke his shoulder bone.
I remember coming over the top of the hill, and all of a sudden I'm behind Mike Spence, and all of a sudden he loses it. And then all of a sudden I hit the same thing, and I lost it. Went off the road, landed upside down, and stuck in the car. You couldn't get out.
The vast majority of the competitors didn't make it around the first lap. So when I came in at the end of the first lap, the entire pit came roaring down and wanted to say, where is so-and-so with so-and-so and so?
A lot of times things just happen during a race where your camera just happened to be on the right car at the right time and a situation would happen. And then we would go back the following day and actually shoot around that particular accident that we would photograph.
Kerry, it was perfect. Absolutely. Out of everyone. Perfect.
We talked about how do we do these wrecks. We had a great special effects man, a guy named Milton Rice, and he came up with the idea of this cannon, this hydrogen cannon. So what we did was we took the engines out of some of our cars, put dummies in them, and put them on this hydrogen cannon, loaded the thing up, and fired it.
How about the danger? Are you conscious of this all the time, or are you more conscious of getting your right profile into shots?
Well, no. When you're in a car, particularly a Formula car, but any car, you cannot think of anything else. I mean, if you don't think of going from one point to another, from one your braking point to your gearing down to where you make your turn into a corner, if you stray from that and you worry about where that camera is or anything like that, then you're off the course. So we strictly do not worry about it. We'll do our acting in the pits.
I never felt like it was dangerous, even when we did the fire sequence at Brands Hatch. I did that stunt, and I had 2 bottles of butane in there that were leading to tubes, letting the fuel out. And I just turned them both off as I pulled off to the side, and as I started to get out, it just blew into a ball of fire. I think that's when the insurance company canceled my insurance on the picture. I drove the last month and a half without insurance.
I'm okay.
That's what makes Grand Prix the best movie ever made about motor racing, because you have that wonderful blend of storyline with reality. One of my favorite scenes, in fact, is the driver's briefing at the Belgian Grand Prix, partly because I'd never seen anything like that before, and here was Jochen Rindt sitting there, and there was Bruce McLaren actually talking. I'd never seen or heard Bruce McLaren's voice before until we saw that scene.
Well, they haven't changed the road in 10 years. They're not allowed to do it now.
I must say, Graham Hill's acting is surprisingly like Graham Hill in real life. You see him celebrating and pouring a pint of beer over somebody's head. You see him making jokes, and you also see him eyeing up even Mary Saint. And that's exactly what Graham Hill would have done. If a driver turned up with a new girlfriend, Graham would eye her up and down.
It was hard to tell where reality ended and the film began. Lorenzo Bandini walked the circuit with John at Monte Carlo. And John said, Lorenzo, where do you think there would be a really bad accident? Because they had to figure out the place for Brian Bedford and Jim Gardner to have their accident. And he said it would definitely be on the dog leg. It was odd because that's where he had his fatal accident. I guess it was a year or 2 years later. Lovely, lovely man.
And we stayed at one point in France, Clermont-Ferrand, and there were a lot of drivers there. And Mike Spence, he had dinner with a lot with his wife and family. And this was going to be his last race because he wanted to have a different kind of life, now that he had children. And he was killed. And so many of those people have gone.
At that time, it was impossible to make a film without bringing death into it because it was so much a part of Formula One. Jochen Rindt was killed in 1970 at Monza. Jim Clark sadly was killed in 68. A lot of these guys lost their lives after the making of Grand Prix. So one has to say that it's true to life in that sense. A lot of the purists who saw the film when it first came out said this is too sensationalist, there's too much blood, there are too many accidents. Real motor racing isn't like that. Well, the truth of the matter is that there isn't a single incident that happens anywhere in the film that didn't happen at some stage in real Grand Prix racing.
When you look at the 60s in that film, I guess it's the end of the age of innocence, if you like. You look at it now and we appear to be so naive in terms of safety and the risks people took to even just get camera shots and stuff that we wouldn't dare do now.
And it could never be done again. I think Frankenheimer did that at the absolute latest point in the history of the sport because it could never be done now for a million reasons. The teams wouldn't have the time to do it. The drivers wouldn't have the time to do it. But above all, the Formula One industry wouldn't let Hollywood make that movie unless they paid so much money that it bankrupted Hollywood for the rest of time immemorial.
Well, I got to thank Steve McQueen for not doing it and left it open for me to do. McQueen didn't see it. He's my next-door neighbor. He didn't see it for, a year or so. And finally, Chad, his son, made him take it. And I was driving home. I stopped, say hi. And he said, well, we went to your movie. I said, yeah, what do you think? He said, pretty good picture, pretty good picture. Yeah, that's about as much as you're going to get out of Steve.
Every day I'd wake up, I would wonder just what would happen that day that would be more exciting than what I did yesterday. And sure enough, something would come up. That's what made the picture really the most exciting motion picture I ever worked on.
We knew at the time that it was special, but I don't think any of us realized, because we were very young, and we didn't realize how things were going to change, how much they were going to change. Looking back, it was a wonderful moment. It was a gift.
I think John wanted to really make an audience feel that they were right there doing it and would go to any end to accomplish that. And I think that he did accomplish it, and he accomplished it at a time when it was not the easiest thing to do.
Making a picture is a strange thing because after everybody hates you when you're making it. It's when the picture comes out that they say, oh boy, it's really pretty good, or vice versa, everybody loves you when you're making it and the picture comes out and you never work again, It can work that way too.